We've talked and continue to talk quite a bit about the intelligence community's efforts to undermine the previous president of the United States, and not to mention its collaboration with the media to undermine individual freedoms in this country. But this report, based on a U.S. intelligence leak, here we go again, Israel's Mossad intel agency was encouraging protests against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This report suggested that Mossad was instigating people to protest against Bibi's proposed judicial reforms, including several explicit calls to action that decried the Israel government, according to U.S. Signals Intelligence. Now, this claim that was made and the reporting on it was dismissed by both Mossad and Netanyahu as not factual. But those judicial reforms that were proposed did create a lot of political consternation, and ultimately, because of that, were scrapped by Bibi. So I wonder, this against the backdrop of the intel documents that were allegedly leaked by that Massachusetts Air Guardsman, which included a suggestion that America was talking to Israel about buying weapons through a third party that could be sent to D.C. and sent on to Ukraine so that Israel could maintain its effective neutrality with respect to that war while aiding and abetting the Ukrainians. For more on this and other matters, pleased to be joined by Dr. Daniel Aschheim, Deputy Consul General at the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest. Dr. Aschheim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good morning, Dan. Happy to be on the show.
Happy to have you. So let's start with the report from U.S. Intel, Signals Intelligence, that Mossad was working to undermine the judicial reforms that President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, proposed, and, of course, the administration's dismissal of those claims as untrue.
Yeah, so as you mentioned correctly, these are false lists probably made by someone. I don't know exactly, still investigating in America where it came from and who the reports are from, but definitely this is false accusations. It was published both by the Prime Minister's office and by other sources. There's nothing into this piece of information.
But with respect to the proposed judicial reforms themselves, that did bring people out into the streets, and for Americans, describe, and the Chicago area listeners, describe the nature of the proposed judicial reforms. What was the point of contention, and why Bibi ultimately scrapped them?
So what we are seeing now in Israel is a very interesting process of democracy at its best. We see a new government that was recently elected that are proposing reforms for the judicial branch and other parts of Israeli systems, saying that this is the best way to bring democracy back to the way it should have been. So the claim is of the current government that the Supreme Court took responsibilities upon itself that were never granted by the legislator throughout the years, and that they are chosen by also politicians, but also themselves. So other judges also vote for other judges, and therefore the proposed reform, and as they claim, they want to make more democracy into the system, bring it closer to the American system. On the other hand, the opposition is claiming that these reforms are going to politicize the judicial system and therefore undermine some of the democratic values of Israel. And this brought hundreds of thousands of Israelis to protest on the streets, and which shows how strong Israeli democracy is, because this is turning really public opinion and the heated debate at times. This brought to the table both sides to sit and seek for a compromise, which is going to come with consensus, a large consensus. They're sitting in the president's office with serious teams from both sides with a goodwill to resolve this issue that has been really shaping, and for the last 3 months, the way Israel is handling the situation.
How much of the divide in Israel over these judicial reforms is across religious lines, essentially the more religious Jews on one side and the more secular Jews on the other?
I wouldn't say that this is what clarifies what makes the two sides in this discussion. I think it's a discussion between those who are more conservative and claim what is the role of the Supreme Court in decision making regarding laws that were passed in the legislature, whether they have the authority to overrule them, or the other side that wants them to be more activist. So to have them the capacity and authority to overrule laws on the other hand. And I think this is in between Israeli society. We see a shift here, not anymore the traditional right and left or the religious and secular. We see a combination of people for it that you would not expect and people against it that you would not expect. So I don't think it has anything to do specifically with the religious factions, even though, of course, there are support because the coalition parties are formed from the ultra-Orthodox groups as well. They are supporting it, but every group supports it from their various other reasons. Sometimes it's their interest for their group. Sometimes the way they see the other group sees liberal democracy as something that is sometimes they're feeling that they're discriminated by the liberal democracy to their way of life. So everyone has their own thoughts, but I don't think it's a clear line that is one because the ones who are leading it are not necessarily coming from the ultra-Orthodox groups.
The other matter I mentioned, the classified documents that were allegedly leaked by this Air National Guardsman that indicate, among other things, that the U.S. had been in talks with Israel to purchase weapons to a third party, to get those weapons to the Ukrainians, and use a third-party cutout so that Israel's fingerprints weren't on the supplying of weapons to Ukraine. Is there truth to that?
So again, the leaked documents, it's always a combination of false information and half information, a quarter information. About this thing, of course, I don't have more information about it, and whatever the official response is the response that I have. But I do want to say about that Israel, you mentioned in the beginning, Israel's stance regarding Ukraine is neutral. Israel did not have a neutral stance regarding Ukraine. This one has to emphasize. From the beginning, Israel said that we all agree that the unity of Ukraine is number one priority. The aggressor here was one side, it was clear, and that is our responsibility as Israel is also to help on a humanitarian basis. Israel was the only country, the first country, to send a full operational field hospital into Ukraine. We accepted Ukrainian refugees, and Israel is supporting in many, many ways. We sent thousands of civilians and part of the Israeli government agencies to support their humanitarian efforts. So Israel's stance has been clear here.
Yeah, that was a poor choice of words by me, but what I meant, I didn't mean that you were neutral in terms of Russia, Ukraine. I meant that Israel had not been one of the countries committed to providing military support to Ukraine. Right. Yeah, that's what I meant. And is that's still the position as far as you understand it?
This is currently the position. Israel is reviewing all the time throughout what the needs are. We get requests from various sides. We analyze it. We talk to our partners. We understand the situation. We have constant contact. We have our minister, Eli Cohen, Minister of Foreign Affairs, visited Kiev, met the President Zelensky a couple of months ago. They've discussed various things, and whenever there will be something, it will be done publicly. And Israel is proud of its relationship with Ukraine, and therefore, at this stage, we are talking still about defense mechanisms and humanitarian support. If something will be different in the future, we will notify.
I wanted to move over to Iran, and what are your thoughts on President Biden's Iranian policy?
So, good morning, Amy. So, this is, for us, it's very important. After the visit of President Biden in Jerusalem, for us, it was very important to hear that he promised that Iran will never, ever acquire nuclear weapons. And we trust when the U.S. president says such a thing, and now is the time for the world to act. Iran is the closest that it's ever been to acquiring nuclear weapons, and it's the Western world's responsibility, and Israel, of course. For us, one needs to understand that for the rest of the world, it might be a strategic issue. For Israel, it's an existential issue. And for us, Iran is a country that openly says that they want to wipe us off the map, but they don't only wait to do that, they actually work on a daily level with proxies all around the Middle East. So they acquire them with weapons that shoot at Israeli civilians, rockets to terrorists in Lebanon, in Syria, in the Gaza Strip, and they are providing terrorism tools for terrorists. They are providing funds to undermine the stability of the whole Middle East. So not only with Israel, but with other more moderate Sunni countries. And we have to be very clear about this. The moral world needs to tell Iran this game is over. And they need to understand that they will lose a lot from trying to acquire nuclear weapons and proceed at this stage. So we work together very closely with the U.S. administration, the previous one, with the current one, in order to make sure that this will never, ever happen. And with this, some things are done confidentially, some things are done publicly, some things are done diplomatically, and some things are done in other methods to ensure that the world will not have a nuclear Iran.
How concerned are you about Chinese Communist Party influence in the Middle East, the alignment, if you will, between the Chinese and the Russians, which brings in the Iranians? There are overtures made in recent weeks to the Saudis to to sort of warm up the relationship between the Saudis and the Iranians for larger geopolitical goals, perhaps in advance of ultimately Chinese Communist Party interests. Is that a real threat for Middle East stability, for Israeli stability, as far as you're concerned? And if it is America responding as strongly as she needs to, in your estimation?
So I'll start by saying that the Saudi-Iran connection is worrying. It's not something it's not a positive step. We see Saudi Arabia in the moderate countries that are helping stability, and Iran, as I mentioned before, is destabilizing the region. And we would hope that not to see those things that we did before. Nevertheless, the Chinese involvement, we're very close working with China on many economic projects and other things. We are aware of the issues that were recently done. And of course, as I mentioned before, we are not satisfied to see them happening. Nevertheless, China remains a close ally as well of Israel. Never replace, of course, the United States, which is will remain number one ally of Israel, politically, strategically, morally, value, and every other thing. So for us, of course, the American involvement in the Middle East is what we would like to see. The more, the better. So historically, currently, and in the future. And with the other parties who try and get into the area, of course, we need to evaluate each one and see what is going on case by case. And we welcome any involvement to promote peace. So if there's a country that wants to help us promote peace with the other Arab neighbors, we'll be happy. But of course, there's no replacement for the United States in the Middle East and in the world in general.
He is Dr. Daniel Aschheim, Deputy Consul General at the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest. Dr. Aschheim, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All the best. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank that cares about your business and is invested in your success. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
Hi, I'm Chris Johnson, CEO of Classic Cinema